Miss University UNC. Sitting in the corner up there.
Yeah. Good morning, Anita.
Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, Anita likes to wait on the telephone, so you won't have to get up 15 minutes early to put on a little makeup and lipstick, you know.
Gosh,
As we stream video. We know. We heard.
That was a secret between the two of us, but I guess now.
Sorry. Sorry.
No, everybody knows.
Again, everybody knows.
So our poll this morning, based on the autopsy results, do you expect anyone to be held for the shooting of PC Jilks? We had 15 people voting in the allotted time. 10 of you said no. You don't expect anybody to be held or held accountable, and 5 of you said yes. You're such a cynical society.
I have 9-6, you know, Richard.
You have 9-6? Yeah. I have 10-5.
Okay, well, you're the judge today, so.
Exactly. So what I say goes.
Yep.
So it's 10-5. We're such a cynical society. I think they get that from Paul.
We can't have political agents doing counting.
I didn't hear what he said.
Yeah, we can't have political agents doing counting.
He normally goes soft when he's sending
some sort of jive.
Yeah.
I'm glad you knew when I go soft.
When he's
hello. Anita is online.
We have a guest in studio. Try to behave, please.
Can we hear from Dorothy? Can we hear from Dorothy, Paul?
Anita's accustomed to my shenanigans.
Correct.
Recording in progress.
Thank you, Dorothy.
There we go. So at least we didn't get that part on record.
Somebody got it on record somewhere.
We did somewhere.
Morning, MP Haynes.
Good morning, MP Haynes.
Good morning, everyone.
How was the beautiful constituency of Tabaquite this morning?
We're doing well. Mm-hmm. You know.
How are you dealing with the rains?
We fared well with the rains. No major incidents, thankfully. I've actually, the month of May, we spend a lot of the time doing awareness and prep for the rainy season. My first year as an MP, the first month, the day I opened the office, we had terrible flooding. So I've made a major part of what I do during the dry season with the advocacy for making sure water courses are cleared, etc., but then also preparing citizens for things that we may not be able to anticipate and expect. So, you know, where can you get your sandbags? Where can you access relief should something happen? And so we spend all of May doing that kind of community awareness in prep for a rainy season. And so,
what are some of the bigger challenges you face in Tabaquite, Anita? I know the last time I drove through Tabaquite, the roads were terrible. So I don't know if that has improved. And which regional or municipal corporation will you fall under?
I fall primarily under the Couva Tabaquite Telpara Regional Corporation. The infrastructure deterioration is a major concern across the constituency. We have a number of areas that landslips, major concern. I've had the unfortunate circumstance of visiting a number of persons who have lost their homes just over the past year and a half or so. And so we are facing things like landslips, the roads, as most people will know. And then I do face a water situation. We have a number of communities without pipe-borne water. So that's Cotton Hill, which, if you know Gasparillo, it's just right on the outskirts. So it's, you know, I know a number of persons will think, all right, maybe it's the most remote areas that would face some of these issues. It's really not. So Cotton Hill, Coruscant, they've never had a pipe-borne supply of water. So to rectify some of those things, those are the challenges that I have faced. Now, mind you, I would have spent the entirety of my term thus far also, you know, dealing with the pandemic and not being able to have community meetings or not being able to do my version of representation in the way that I envisioned before running for office. And so, you know, community meetings and a lot more community interaction. So I do look forward to a time when, you know, that is possible and safe to do so. So
yeah,
but as,
you know, Anita,
just one more thing, Richard. As you mentioned roads and water. what is your relationship like with the line ministers that are responsible for those things? And do you get a positive response from them?
I have a good working relationship with almost everyone. Does that translate into a positive response? Because a positive response, in my respectful view, is getting the work done. You know, that hasn't translated to the extent that I would hope to see it. I mean, there are a number of reasons and whatnot, but my job is to represent for my community, and that's the community of Tabaquite. And so, has it translated? We've had site visits, we've had a number of, you know, they have acknowledged the issue and acknowledged that there's a problem. Have I gotten a solution by and large? Not as yet, but I'll continue to do.
Yeah.
All right, Richard.
I just find it incredible that there are communities in Trinidad and Tobago that are not connected to the water grid still in 2022 and that have never been. I find that incredulous to believe in a country of such a small population and a small land space, quite frankly, that still exists. But I wanted to take it from a different angle, Anita. Tell us what's beautiful about Tabaquite. Why should people come to Tabaquite? What are the pluses? What are the pluses of the area that you represent?
I mean, listen, we are.
I would have started off by saying the MP, but go ahead.
No, right. We are centrally located. We have a number of beautiful natural sites. On one of my visits in March, I went to see Allen Road, which is a deplorable road area, but the residents then took me to the highest point in the central range, which was just walking distance because you could drive most of it, and then you just walk up and then you get amazing views, a 360 view of the country. It is gorgeous. And so I have been in conversation with the Minister of Tourism to organize some walking tours and again, in a way to maintain the pristine natural environment, but still show what our country has to offer. I have the Tortuga RC Church, which is, I try to highlight most of these spaces in our Connecting Tabaquite series, but you see again, the view of the country that you get from the constituency of Tabaquite, because we are located in the central range and we are located, we have the height to see it. I may not have the height, but the constituency does. And so you get these amazing views. You have La Vega, you have a number of areas, again, that promote natural tourism or ecotourism. And so there's a lot to see. Lots of visits. There are a lot of good walking tours. We do February fitness, and we try to again highlight areas that you can take your family on nature walks. I just did one again in Tortuga that took us through a cocoa estate, and they followed up with one on Earth Day, and so there are constantly activities that we post.
Do you have a listing of these activities and sites that people can access? Because the thing about it is Trinidad and Tobago has so many beautiful areas, but we are usually not aware of them.
Right. But so primarily my office would use our Facebook page, and we connect all of anybody from the constituency who wishes to advertise their events and whatnot, and we facilitate that. I participate in a number of these, so we primarily use the MP for Tabaquite Facebook page to showcase everything that's going on within the constituency. Right now as well, since the team sports have reopened, we have night cricket, T20 night cricket, which is again vibrant community activity, good fun, safe spaces, and I think it really is. When I tell you what you can see once you make the little drive, we've spoken about the roads, but what the views that you can get, you cannot be replicated anywhere else on Earth. And so I do encourage persons, and we do highlight a lot of it on the constituency Facebook page, which again is a space really to focus on the constituency of Tabaquite and highlighting not just our needs, but what we can provide to the nation. Additionally, our agriculture sector is, booming. We have been able to provide a number of fresh produce to the country. And so while I highlight the access roads that they have to contend with, I do showcase, and we are going to showcase in a very real way with a video series, how Tabaquite has been feeding the nation and why we consider ourselves to be a key breadbasket in Trinidad and Tobago and what we contribute to the country. And so we've been working with farmers across the constituency to get that video up and running and to be, provided to the nation so that we can show, and then and show what we can provide and the expertise that we can also lend to the wider national community as we discuss things like agriculture, etc.
Last question.
I know because one of our transmitter sites is up on that same by the RC church he spoke about.
Yes, correct.
The view is breathtaking, but you said they play cricket and stuff. So you're trying to tell me that the grounds are maintained, unlike Matlot and Grand River and so on, where it's overrun?
Again, that is continuous work. Personally, for me, I think things like that, you really ought not to need any kind of advocacy or anything. It should just be a simple matter of a rotation. It's grass grows, it's coming. Cut the grass on a regular space and then stop having residents call my office for me to call somebody else to say, grass grew. Let's, but we do stay in touch with the communities. Whilst campaigning, people didn't believe that I actually gave them my cell phone number, but it did. And so residents are able to contact me directly to say things like, we needed some assistance here, there. So it is a challenge. There are certain spaces where people will have to call and say, MP, this ground hasn't been cut for X, Y, and Z, and so then I try to reach out to the relevant authorities to get it done. So it's not a perfect world, but we do try to make the best of the situation.
As I said, my last question on the issue of representation, MP Haynes, is do MPs collect data on how COVID affected their constituency in terms of the infections and in terms of the deaths? Is that something an MP will have, that kind of data?
So that is, if to say whether or not we do collect it, we try, but that is based on voluntary information. So I am not able to access, hospital information. So we know, for example, the families that we would have helped. So there are a number of families who, while they were in quarantine, were unable to access any type of food because the entire family, because we live in Trinidad, so an entire family may live in the space of three homes in one compound. So everybody ended up getting quarantined, so they couldn't get groceries and whatnot. So where we get that information coming into the office, well, then we'll know, okay, an area had X number of infections based on their voluntary reporting to the office, and then us providing assistance so that we knew then to be able to check back in with persons. Similar with COVID deaths, where I have reached out and said, my loved one passed away, they were X, Y, and Z. We would record that, and again, that is to enable our office to do follow-up to see what kinds of assistance we may be able to provide, and just really to touch base. So my office has some data, but data that would have been voluntarily given to the office by constituents.
Okay, sure. And to go straight into the politics, I saw that the UNC Senate bench yesterday voted on 3 occasions, as reported by our goodly colleague there, Senator Richards, that the UNC Senate bench voted unanimously with the independent bench, whom not too long ago they accused of eating our food and supporting all the motions that the government would have brought. You get to give
let me correct that. The UNC bench voted to support a motion by Senator Anita Ryan. They did not vote to support the independent bench. That is an inaccurate representation.
Well, they voted to support a motion from an independent senator whom not too long ago they accused of eating our food and only supporting things that the government.
Well, then it shows you that what we've been saying all along is true, that we take every motion, every piece of legislation on its merit. And so it's not, we don't vote en bloc. We don't decide that come March, we will only vote one way. So each thing is taken on its own merit. So the Senate bench took the motion by Senator Ryan on its merit and opted to vote along with not the mover of the motion becomes irrelevant. But does the motion itself hold water? And Senator Richards would recall when I was in the Senate and on his own motion on special education, we lent absolute support in the contribution, because once a motion holds merit and we see what it can do for the nation, what the understanding of the motion means for the development of our country, of course we'll support it.
But does that same explanation hold true for if the government Senate brings a motion?
Absolutely. Again, on its merit. And you know, that's the thing. And I've said this time and time again. Very rarely do movers of motions or anything come and argue the merit of their motion or seek to convince others why the motion ought to be supported. They seek to tell us why they assume people will do X, Y, and Z. But I've always, and my stance, you could check my record on this, when you come on to debate, when you're debating a motion, you're a mover of a motion, it is your job to convince persons within that space why your motion has merit. And the merit is not you bringing the motion and you are a good person and whatnot. No, the merit is in the motion. And if you can skillfully do so, you'll get what support you're looking for.
And to add it to that also, I can add, Anita, I almost said Amrita, Anita, that even responders to the motion on any bench, but I can speak for myself, discuss the merits and demerits and offer suggestions on how it can be improved.
Correct.
So you'd find that what many people don't see is that even when you're going by the clause examination, sometimes people vote for the clause, sometimes they vote against the clause. So sometimes it's very nuanced in that way.
Correct. And well, you know, a lot of the times that clause by clause, most people would have tuned out by that moment. And what a lot of people fail to realize, that a single clause could change the way that you have to vote on an entire motion. And that and I always, the legislative process, I mean, in this case, we're talking about a motion and a private member's motion, but a singular clause can create a space where you, on merit, cannot accept an entire motion if you're unable to change it.
Or you abstain.
Correct. And so the legislative process, by design, and a design that I do not think anybody should be seeking to change, is intricate. It has to be that way, because you are making, we are making laws in the parliament, and laws that ought to be able to stand the test of time. And so if it takes a law, I've noted the national discussion and people want speedy legislative responses. That could never be, and it ought not to be, because legislation is not a quick fix reaction. There are other speedy responses that can be taken.
When we have speedy legislation, sometimes not as thorough, we get Section 34 and all these things, because people don't examine it closely enough. And as you said, you may support a bill or a motion in principle, but then one clause or two words in a clause, you have real issues with it because of the implications or its impact on the population.
Correct. Even things like the order of words. I mean, you rarely see the.
And Richard is an attorney, so he understands that better than anybody else here.
Right. So to answer your question, yes, it does hold the same for the government. The conversation and the national discourse around legislation is what it is right now, which then creates this idea of support versus no support, or who is standing in the way or who is blocking something versus, but the process of legislation and making of laws, I think, has to be really decided in the moment when you are debating, as well as when you're examining the clause, whether or not you are of the belief that this will benefit the majority of the people in the nation. And that's the way I think we ought to view legislation and the voting on legislation.
You're the Shadow Minister of Education. I think you have been vocal, please correct me if I'm wrong, in having an issue with all students heading back out to school. We had a poll yesterday which asked if primary school students should be allowed to go back online at least until September, given the rising numbers of cases. What is your perspective on that?
My issue was returning to the status quo. That being said, my issue remains that once the pandemic hit, we had to make certain changes. We had to make it very quickly. But not all of those changes that we would have made are things that we ought to discard as you come out of a pandemic space slowly. So it wasn't so much as the return to school physically and whether or not, but it was just this idea that, all right, COVID is over, pack up everything and return to business as usual pre-COVID. So you're looking at, and so what about the conversations on connectivity, the conversations on devices, the conversation on technology?
But you would know that one of the challenges the education ministry had, and this has been a practical challenge, is that while a hybrid system was envisioned initially, some members of the teaching fraternity were saying it is difficult given the limited resources to teach online and in class at the same time. So
absolutely. So again, it wasn't, that's what I'm saying. It was this rush to return to the status quo that I have an issue with, because acknowledging those issues, acknowledging that a hybrid system is very difficult for a number of schools. Well, as you do the reopening, find ways on a smaller scale to fix that issue. And therefore, you are creating a solution for a problem that we already know exists, but that we know, because you are able to physically return to school in some measure, you can then fix it. So then you can take some of those schools and organize so that they can have better technology in school, not necessarily just to facilitate a hybrid system, but to facilitate an education system that will benefit students in this century. And so things like that, I thought we really will miss the opportunity to innovate correctly now, because for a large part for the prior 2 years, we had to, but now we can opt to include some of these things. And I did not see that. The conversation I heard was that students have to be back out to school, and I agree. You have to find a way to return physically to school. I agree with that. And where I disagree is that the return to school has to be like it was in early 2020, and we forget every lesson learned. We abandon every small step that may have been made by force or not. And then we return to the paper-based system and we pretend the last few years never happened. And so that is the issue that I have. And then now I did advocate for slower, we already had a phased approach, but I thought that we could have found a way, perhaps, again, on a rotational basis, not everybody out on certain days and whatnot. And we are seeing some challenges with that right now. I am in the process of doing some research to perhaps raise a motion in Parliament on Friday so that we can get some answers. Like most of us, despite the fact that I'm an MP, I have access to the same data, save and except for data within my own constituency that's being presented. But I do think the ministry has to really do a lot better in terms of presenting what is happening currently within our school system so that all stakeholders can feel a lot more secure with the process as we go into the term, which is an examination term for most persons, right? CSEC, CAPE, etc. So there is that added pressure. So I am looking at it. We have been in discussion with some principals, parents, and students included to just get the sentiment and on the ground experience of what's happening. And I do also have some school visits planned, and so that my press releases and conversations that I have will reflect those discussions as well.
Sure, because I have said this before, that MP Haynes has been silenced, and you got the impression that with the way you have articulated the position, I would imagine, of the UNC, nobody else has done that thus far. It's just noise, and it's just opposition to this and opposition to that. But clearly, you've been able to articulate a position that people could listen to. And why haven't we been hearing from MP Haynes, except for the Power Breakfast show? We've not been hearing from MP Haynes at all.
No, well, again, you see, it's where my spaces, I have, again, had to utilize a lot of social media. But on every issue, whether it is a press release, interviews, different things, I am around You may not.
But I think what Wendell is saying is really, and this is my experience also. I find you've been quiet in the lower house. I think is
Like
that
she's
what
been
Wendell is saying?
silenced then?
Well, I
No,
don't know
I'm
that she's
not
been silenced. I'm saying she's been
silenced.
quieter.
All right. Listen, as you get into certain spaces, you really have. So, as public relations officer for the UNC, my role at that time was to speak on every issue for the United National Congress. And so I would have been everywhere all the time. And once you transition from that space and you have a constituency and a shadow, I respect communication lines. So therefore, I raise issues on education and I raise issues within my constituency. And I have no problem articulating issues for the party on other spaces, but we do have spokespersons for that. And so I think what you would have seen is just a transition from hearing from me on every single issue to hearing from me on the issues that are under my remit at this
Well,
time.
clearly Wendell misses hearing from you more. What are your perspectives?
Diplomatically put.
What are your
Diplomatically
perspectives,
put.
MP Haynes, on the ways that we can remediate the significant learning gaps identified that came about during the pandemic? Not only Trinidad and Tobago, to be fair, it happened all over the world. Because we had to transition in emergency mode to online.
Yeah.
We've already had a cadre of about 2,000 or so students barely making the 30% mark at SCA, and many others struggling when they moved on to secondary school. And now the pandemic has exacerbated that in large respect. As I said, to be fair, it is not exclusive to Trinidad and Tobago. Online learning is not the same as face-to-face learning, but what should be happening now to try and recover that ground and close the gap effectively?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Paul, but you chair the Joint Select Committee on Public Admin, Administration, right?
Social services,
and so I utilize the data collected by that Joint Select Committee that showed us that, 47,000 students were never able to get online. Those are the students who never accessed online learning. It didn't include the numbers of students who accessed and then subsequently fell off during the pandemic.
But to put some context in that snapshot was taken at a particular point in the pandemic. So
Correct.
that number did not maintain through the pandemic.
Correct, but understood. However, while we look at the number, and I'm not using it to be startling, I'm using it that because what struck me was that they never accessed, because there are a number of students who from time to time can use their parents' phone and get onto WhatsApp and the online platform, or get the schoolwork via WhatsApp, and they were counted as having access to online learning, but I don't know what quality of learning you'll get from some of those things. But I use that to say that that Joint Select Committee, for me, as the shadow, provided critical amounts of data that then informed my thinking as to what ought to be done. And when I raised my private member's motion in Parliament, it's very clear about focus on equitable access to education, but also a question as to what will be done for the students who we still don't have a number. And I don't know that we'll ever be able to quantify properly students who never access or who access part-time or who access, and what do we do to bring them back up to a standard that they ought to be at. And
but in addition to that, just put a pin, the other data point that is very startling, or is going to be startling, or has been startling, is the ultimate output, the grades, and the grades have fallen. So
Correct.
Even though we may not have definitive numbers and absolute access, limited access, inconsistent
Correct.
access, inconsistent technology, we have access to the grades.
Correct.
And the comparative
Correct.
of the grades before, during, and after.
Correct. Correct. And so we are seeing, because these are the students who would have spent their last 2 years in pandemic mode. And listen, it's not just the access to education, right? It is also mental health, right? These students have been under severe pressure. So for all the adjustments that we have had to make as adults, they've also had to make, as students, they've had to grapple with the realities of a pandemic, of lockdown, still do school, and then still be asked to take these exams, and still be asked to take the exam at the standard prior to the pandemic. And so there are a number of things, which is why, again, I continue to vocally advocate for, student support services. We saw a cut in the last budget. That they need to be bolstered and that they need to be expanded, because they are so necessary at this point in time, because the students have been going through the
Well, they don't
absolute
to be they don't to be expanded. They need to have the necessary resources in the present
correct.
configuration, because in the same JSC we found out that just under half the positions were not filled.
Correct.
So I
Exactly.
mean that
So that
tells,
they
so
exist
expansion is one thing, but operating at optimal capacity
correct.
now is
Because
something else.
they exist for the most part, the spaces exist in theory, but not in practice. And so if we are to fill the spaces, we will get perhaps, and so those are the things that we're looking at. I feel like as we discuss the physical reopening of schools, the students who have fallen back or who have not been able to keep up during the pandemic, we are not able to focus as much on them, because now people are saying, listen, the physical reopening of schools is not a magic wand. It doesn't then erase the 2 years that we will not be able to access or had not been able. So whether we are looking at things like, increased support via like homework centers or something, but there needs to be some conversation and critical thinking about.
Well, I think on the online hybrid, of course, I think is here to stay, and online will be part of our lives moving forward. It's part of even us speaking to each other right now.
Correct.
And the issue, the problem I have is that you had this deficit in the school population of people who could not access, who never accessed. You obviously have people who have problems accessing the basic items to be able to be online, whether it be computers or tablets or whatever it is. And I'm not so sure how much of that is being assessed in the school system as the students move back out into in-person.
Sure.
Is there some level of checking in each class? Do you have access? Or students filling out a form? Yes, I have access. No, I don't. Yes, I need some sort of mobile Wi-Fi. Because it has to be integrated as part of us moving forward in terms of the education system. And avoiding it and not talking about it just means you're going to leave that gap untouched and not dealt with as we move forward. Because COVID is still here with us. It isn't gone. It's not an endemic status yet. We are hoping it's getting there. So you don't know if we may have to lock down again. God forbid if a really terrible and disastrous variant came about.
Well, to be fair, Richard, and MP Haynes can correct me, even though there may not be synchronous alignment of in-class and online learning, certainly the infrastructure that had been put in place to transition can be utilized. Maybe they can hire retired teachers to do spot supervised access to online stored information for students who want some remedial help. It doesn't have to be a full class in parallel to what's happening in class, but it can be support services online that students can option at their convenience. That will help.
But I'm not disputing that, but I'm just talking about the physical infrastructure, the physical tools being accessible to students who don't have it. And how do you know you don't have it unless you're checking?
Correct. And what you're raising is something that I raise all of the time, which is when I raise issues about what is the data for behind the policy making. It's not even just because I, want to find something to challenge the minister on. I want to ensure that they are collecting the data, because if you are giving it to the population. If you are telling us, all right, these are the numbers of students, etc., then you know that there are survey samples in schools, that there are, outreach groups, then you know that there is a system for data collection, and we are not making policies in an ad hoc manner. But we are almost never given numbers. We are almost always given some sort of anecdotal, and so I will continue to raise my questions regarding data, questions for written answer, questions for oral answer, because we do need to know what the numbers are. We need to know that it isn't, data collection also does not need to be limited to pandemic things. But
to be fair, a lot of the data we got from the JSC that you referenced came from the education ministry.
Correct. But you got it as part of an inquiry. We ought to get it as the nation as par for course.
Agreed.
That should be normal.
Agreed.
Right? When you have a press conference, you come in and you say, this is the policy. This is the reason we've decided on this policy. These are the numbers that show this is the best direction to go. Anything else you're telling me really is just a conversation piece, because you aren't giving me the facts behind why we are doing certain things. And if we get to that space, you'll get a lot more trust in the system. You still have differences of opinions, but then you understand the backing behind the policy making, or at the very least, you are disagreeing with something based in fact.
Do you think we should revisit the issue of primary school students because they're not vaccinated in schools, and because of the I think we had, is it 18 in 16 schools, or some number in 16 schools testing positive, 92 on quarantine, 92 awaiting results, and some others on quarantine or something like that in the first week and a half of back to face-to-face classes. And that is those who were tested, and because of the possibility of that being a spike point.
Yeah. I have I'll tell you what my own opinion is, but I just want to preface that by saying that I did tell you that I have some visits with principals and some teachers coming this upcoming week. So I'll be better positioned to answer that question from their perspective as educators and persons in the system on what they are looking for. But I do believe we probably ought to revisit whether or not all students have to be in school at the same times. But I would want to have the space to be flexible with that answer when I get the inputs from these educators, because they also need time and spaces to get through their decision making. And so, and on the issues of where persons are and whatnot, I really like to defer to the people who are in the system, who work within the system, and not me pontificating on something from outside of the system.
When you say you're going to be visiting schools, MP Haynes, do you mean throughout the country or in your constituency?
In my constituency, in the first instance, yes.
Oh.
I mean, I do go wherever I'm invited, so that doesn't leave that space out, but because I have done, read aloud things in different schools for principals and that sort of thing. But in this instance, I am referring to in my constituency, yes.
Okay. All right.
Why do you think you were chosen for shadow education?
I asked.
Well, you asked for it. Why did you ask? What was your interest?
My interest, for me, the education system within Trinidad and Tobago and my access to education has changed my life. Everything that I have is based on what I've been able to accomplish, and that is via my scholarship and the various things. But I understand, if you know the area that I am from, Piparo, and it's a very small village, very rural community, and I understand what access to education can do on a very personal space and what it can do in terms of national development. If we approach it not just from an academic point of view, from a practical point of view as to what are we looking forward to in developing our nation, and how can we optimize our education sector with the thinking of development in mind. So not just with exams in mind, but the creation of the society and the developed Trinidad and Tobago that we're hoping to see. And so I wanted an opportunity to not to shadow the sector as a learning opportunity in the first instance, as well as access to, again, the stakeholders, and then being so involved in something that I am so passionate about. And I saw that as my space. So I did ask. And
we share that passion. Do you think we're maximizing our tertiary education sector, given the density of tertiary institutions. We just had amazing acclamation in terms of being in the top 5% of researchers globally. I think they identified about 7 UWI based, and congratulations to UWI on that. But the way that St. George's University, perhaps in Grenada, has been able to get foreign forex into the countries, it's a big money earner for Grenada because of that medical institution. We have UWI highly acclaimed, USC highly acclaimed, UTT growing, and SBCS. There are several other tertiary level institutions in Trinidad and Tobago that can accommodate foreign non-nationals coming in to bring forex, but in addition to providing education online remotely, if we were to market it as a university country.
Yeah, I think with UTT, for example, some of the programs when they first came online, and then I think some of the culture programs, which whether or not they were undersubscribed by local students, I think had they been marketed properly to the international community, we really could have seen the foreign exchange and that kind of thing that you are saying. But what I'm thinking about is that when I think about the tertiary education sector, I think about how can we incentivize certain programs that are in need. So, for example, do we need more teachers in the special education spaces, right? You and I would say, yeah, we do need some assistance. We need people going into that direction. So how do we use the bursaries, the scholarship to incentivize these spaces, get more persons trained, and then get them into the market, whether it is, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a scholarship program, but it could be a financial aid space where if you opt into something that the country needs, and there's a job market for it, you get hired within the system, and that's how you pay back your financial assistance, for example, to go to tertiary, go into higher education. So I think those are the ways I'm thinking about rethinking the system and incentivizing the things that we need, and marketing ourselves outside, and it also means thinking about how we consider what we consider developed. Are we chasing an external idea of what development means, or have we as a nation decided what it means for us to be developed, and then are we working towards that? And I think those things are discussions worthy of having.
Yeah, but develop starts with every house being able to have potable water.
Correct.
And we're not even fulfilling that, so
yes.
That's a good starting point, I would think.
MP Haynes, I know we are just about on 8 o'clock, but I would like to get your opinion on the issue of the spyware that's being raised regularly on the opposition platform, especially by the opposition leader. And what are your thoughts on it? Are you being spied upon?
When I entered public life, listen, I've spent my entire life with technology, right? And once I entered public life, I made a very safe assumption that whatever I say online and do online, somebody is listening somewhere, right? And so that, you're talking about it, spied upon and whatnot, but let us be very realistic. Does the ability to access your data and stuff online, does it exist? Yes. Is it far-fetched to believe that any government would want to do so? It isn't. And then the question remains whether or not it is done within the law, and what is the purpose. And those are the conversations that we ought to be having, not whether or not it is happening, because I feel like we are well past that point. So.
Yeah. I mean, I tend to agree with you. And I mean, in our conversation with Gary Griffith yesterday, and certainly with McDonald Jacob the day before, I mean, we discussed it relatively in depth. And one of my main points to Gary Griffith is that there has to be due process in how you surveil citizens. And it cannot be a free-for-all. And if it is, that you have to have some sort of security of tenure for people who manage the main positions that deal with surveillance, agencies, so that you establish that they keep within the due process parameters, then so be it. rather than thinking, well, this person is a political appointee, which is what he brought up yesterday. And Paul, correct me if I'm wrong. He brought up that some of these positions can pander to political appointees, and therefore
he was a political appointee also.
So they may
Exactly.
But you know, Paul,
well, beyond all of that, I'm just talking about the substantive issue of the people who man the places like the SSA, etc. If they are willing to bend their integrity to accommodate political mischief, let's call it that, in surveilling for the wrong reasons, then we can't as a society condone that or continue to exist in that kind of atmosphere.
Yes, and you know, this is the thing. We were talking about legislation and words within legislation. And Paul, you recall that interception of communication for persons within the prison service when we dealt with that, right? I had a major concern with the definition of stored data and what they were going to do, so that you are surveilling a person, for example, in the prisons, which again, I mean, for me, that legislation created all sorts of systems because you are admitting that there are persons within the prison system with cell phones, which is contraband, but you want to surveil. So there was that whole space, but you make a call or message or something to someone, and then or that person's data is now captured under the stored data definition. And the stored data goes as far back as you could have collected data. It's insane. That is an insane reach, given that everything you've done online since you started online, whether you deleted it or not, exists. It exists somewhere. And if it can be captured under stored data, then it can become part of that surveillance. And I find that again. So this is where I think the relations understanding of what data is, of what the interception means, of what surveillance means, of what you are allowing when you think about it, and then you'll understand why the protections are so critical, critical. So whether or not, you know, I can see how we want to think about spyware and whether or not surveillance and how it could turn into a kick sting in Trinidad. I could see how, you know, what you're afraid, that kind of thing, what you're really afraid of. But if you think about it, if you are able to surveil and invade someone's online privacy, you get to, it is that much more intrusive than whatever you can. If you follow me around, if you drive behind me up and down, it is much more intrusive to look at your online.
Because most of your life is online now anyway.
Correct, we live most of our life. So and again, like I said, when I entered politics, because I have existed online for so long, that has always been, you know, at the top of my mind. And so when you get to the concepts of things like stored data, you are now looking up what photos from, you know, university and high school days. Like, so, you know, you get into a space of what are you looking for, you know, and for what research.
Is there something we should be worried about?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Well, there you go. I always say once you have nothing to worry about, then they could spy on.
Worry is subjective.
Privacy.
There may be things that people can use for mischief.
That
whether they be benign or not. And Richard always says we have a constitutional right to privacy.
Yeah.
Yes,
but
we do.
But things that they can use that they ain't using now without spyware, people just evil, and there's some people just evil out there and mischievous, you know.
But we have a constitution. We have a constitutional right to privacy, and the state should not have unfettered access.
Correct.
And it be glibly said, well, I have nothing to hide.
Exactly.
That is not the point. The point is you have no right to know what I'm doing online unless you follow due process and there is some reason to surveil me.
Right. I can't argue with that at all, Richard. But going back to the political appointee thing, you know, once people are appointed during the term of a government, regardless of which government, you know, it's always deemed a political appointment. So I don't know how we're going to get away from that.
The point Mr. Griffith was making was that the director of the SSA, the head of the Defense Force, whoever else are political appointees. In our construct, you can't escape that. The issue, and I follow Richard's point, is that you put buffers in place to insulate those positions from interference from the political directorate.
Yes, I agree. I agree. I thought it was unfortunate that former Commissioner Griffith linked them back to him, that they're part of his batch, and that he trained with them and he knew that. I thought that was unfortunate.
Mentioned yesterday, that Commissioner needs to realize that anything he's saying now is as a political agent.
Yes, he needs to be mindful of that. Anyway, MP Haynes, it's been such a pleasure once again chatting with you and actually seeing you this time. And by the way, I can't help but notice you have red curtains in your living room there.
It's burgundy.
Everything I see
never red, Anita. Never red. Burgundy.
I go with red.
But you can say you have one red lipstick.
I go
So
with
apparently you
red.
can't wear red at all. You can't wear red wrong at all.
Look, there are some people fanatical like that. Trust me.
Yes, I
Well,
know.
I thank you for being able to bring a calm over this show that's not usually there.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
We had a non-double entendre hour.
Well, that's not actually true. I started with double entendre.
All right.
Okay.
What did you get it already?
Thank you, Anita. Have a great day.
All the best. You have a great one.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. And good day to
Thank
your
you.
listeners as
Thank
well.
you.
Take care.
Take care. All right. Bye-bye. All right. Of course, that was Member of Parliament with Tabaquite, Anita Haynes. All right. Let's get into our news brief. All courtesy, Champlain Services.
This is your news bulletin from Power 102 Digital.